Hello and welcome to another commentary video. Please excuse my voice, it's a little hoarse right now, I'm getting over a cold, but let's move on. This is a time-lapse of my work on Major General Duel of Time, a game from Ape Games. Now you may have seen a previous time-lapse video I did for the rulebook layout for their game, Great Dinosaur Rush, and this is a very similar process where I already have some artwork that was done by Mr. Cuddington, and I also had a pre-made document that was provided by the game designer to the publisher, and the publisher sent to me. That's where all of these beginner initial diagrams you see I'm dropping into the rulebook right now. They're just being copied and pasted directly from the embedded images in a Word document into this layout. At this point, I start actually working on the card layout themselves. Now, the cards had a rough layout provided by the illustrator, I think. And I just took the next step and made each of these titles for each card a different color so that they'd be easier to distinguish from each other. This also matches the game logo that I set up in the video that you can see linked up the top of the screen here. Once I've dropped in all the titles into each of those cards, I make a quick little divider that looks more like a trench, and it lines up with the actual game board. Then I get to work actually reformatting these diagrams that you can see here. Initially they were just squares with arrows and little spaces indicating each card and the unit's movement in play. In this case, because the theme of the game is these different generals from throughout history with their own individual soldiers moving across the battlefield, I decided to take the art that had already been made and kind of scattered around the art and actually give them a purpose and use them to represent the cubes that would be moving as you play the game. So each general has its own soldiers, its own army, and the actual movement is still demonstrated in the same way that it was in the prototype, but at least a little bit more flavorfully. About halfway through the development, one of the faction colors was changed from blue to red, so I thankfully had the layered versions of all of the art so I could take some of those colors and just flip them around. Next, I replaced the numbers and arrows that were on the board to something that would be a little bit easier to read from a distance and put them onto these impact crater images that you can see in the background. And I also replaced the flat squares that were representing the cubes that you move around with three-dimensional cubes that I had previously used in another Ape game. Now I am designing the backs of each of these cards, and they're color-coded for red and yellow, so I'm just taking the same castles that were on the boards and just turning those into card backs. The next step is to make some slight changes, slight tweaks to the text after getting some feedback, moving some characters around and adjusting things for adequate printing, adding the border around the board, little things like that, some slight tweaks here and there. Once I've got everything finalized, I took insets of all those diagrams and put them into the actual rulebook to replace the placeholders that I had positioned there initially. Next, really quick, I made some template card designs for the scenarios that you can play throughout the game. I didn't have final text for these, so all these were just some placeholder text with some icons. And then I moved on to the actual box design. And I took some of the art that Mr. Cuddington had already done and used some of the vector paper texture that I already have, the torn border that you can see around these images here. Those are all vector, and I just turned those into frames essentially so that they can bleed across the corner, and dropped in the ground texture that Mr. Cuddington had already illustrated and put that into the vector frame so that it flowed very smoothly around the corners and allowed for some wiggle room if necessary. Initially I was going to go with that grass texture, but as you can see a little bit later on, I decided that it's probably not bold enough and it blends too much into the background, so instead I went with a highly saturated, sort of explosive yellow-orange look here that I drop in instead. And I take some of the same grass battlefield art and all the time-displaced soldiers that Mr. Cuddington had illustrated, put those into the background. Put a couple generals in the foreground so that you can really emphasize the time travel-ish theme. Make a couple little icons for the info box that are based on the illustrations as well, using the helmets as characters or player counts. And effectively, this is a pretty good box front, I think. And once I've got that settled down, then I can move on to finalizing the rest of the scenario card layout, doing some final tweaks on the panels here on the top left hand side. I leave the one panel blank because there's going to be some MSRP information, I think. But based on this design, I can go ahead and start working on the back of the box as well. Here's where I just dropped some placeholder captions from the rulebook. I'm not entirely sure what's going to be here, but I figured this paragraph is roughly identical to how much text would be on the actual back. And I start adjusting the components that are in the game, like the board, the cards, the cubes, and start dropping them in using Illustrator's extrude tool with a deep perspective to get across that 1 point perspective look. And once all that's together, I combine that into a Photoshop document, make it flat so that it's easy to work with in InDesign, drop that flat TIFF into InDesign. And it's at this point I need to start actually working on some reference card layouts, and I had initially forgotten about that in the creative brief, but now that I recall, this was where it became really handy that I had access to layered versions of the original art, so I can just turn these sideways, use those same fort castle illustrations for each player, put those on the reverse side, and then on the front actually show the information that is in the rulebook regarding each of the types of movement that are available in the game. Positioning these and finessing these on the card to make it actually fit and not be too crowded was a little bit tricky, but I think all of this ended up working out pretty well. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy these time-lapse videos, please say so. If you have any questions, please ask in the comments. Thanks very much. I really appreciate it. And tell your friends. Thank you.